Good evening, and let me start with an apology for starting late. I confess to be the cause because my bilateral meetings overshot, and as a result, I couldn't come in time. But I'm sorry, all in the cause of G20. So, um, dear friends and the August gathering, good afternoon. On behalf of the Indian Presidency, I extend a warm welcome to all the distinguished guests and participants who are with us here today. To begin with, I wholeheartedly appreciate the OECD, GIFT, and also G20 Long-Term Investors Club, the LTIC, for providing a strategic platform for all the stakeholders to deliberate on the approaches to augment private sector participation in infrastructure investment in our cities of tomorrow. And I'm happy to inform this August gathering that the city where we have gathered today, GIFT, is one such a city of tomorrow. GIFT International Financial Services Center, the IFSC, has been designated as a special international financial jurisdiction with trusted business regulations, competitive tax structure with focus on ease of doing business, for development and regulation of financial markets in GIFT, a unified regulator, the International Financial Services Center's authority has been set up with statutory backing by consolidating the domestic regulations. Presently, GIFT IFSC has more than 400 plus entities registered across various business segments, including banks, capital markets, insurance, fintech, and aircraft leasing, bullion exchange also, among others, and is rapidly growing with healthy and increasing participation of international and domestic financial institutions. In the context of today's topic under deliberation, financing inclusive, resilient, and sustainable cities of tomorrow, the role of international financial centers like GIFT is very important. Friends, we recognize the potential of infrastructure in delivering public good and enabling shared prosperity, which is the core value underpinning the overall theme of India's presidency, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Cities are engines of economic growth, and robust urban infrastructure is a prerequisite for well functioning cities. The importance of urban infrastructure for economic growth, job creation, and productivity, and for improving societal well being is well established. Infrastructure also facilitates a steady inflow of private and foreign investments, thereby augmenting the capital base of the economy. Hence, it is imperative that we explore innovative ways to augment urban infrastructure by enhancing investments in this sector. Delivering quality urban infrastructure is one of the most pressing challenges for cities in rapidly urbanizing world. Cities are already home to half of the world's population and continue to expand. Today, 55% of world's population lives in urban areas, a proportion that is expected to increase to 68% by 2050. Massive investment in infrastructure will be needed to accommodate this growth. This becomes all the more significant given the need to adapt existing as well as new infrastructure to climate change and to meet the net zero targets. The cumulative climate investment need for cities in emerging markets to mitigate and adapt to climate change is estimated to be 29.4 trillion US dollars between 2018 and 2030. That is, we are left with hardly 7 years on that. The optimum mix of public and private funding and available financing mechanisms to meet such urban infrastructure needs may vary across places. For instance, In areas where private investment is not present or strong, effective public investment acts as a catalyst for private investment. However, the capacities of governments to finance quality infrastructure investments have become highly constrained due to multitude of global challenges. The situation has become even more challenging in the wake of transition to monetary policy tightening in key markets and fiscal policy challenges worldwide. Against this backdrop, innovative financing and funding mechanisms for cities could have significant potential to fill the increasing gaps. To complement the pool of funds available for infrastructure, in addition to public investment and finance provided by MDBs, we need alternate solutions to leverage private sector participation. In this context, innovative financing instruments such as blended finance, structured project finance, securitization, thematic bonds, biodiversity offerings, payments for ecosystem services, and local currency finance are some of the need, etc., need to be explored based on country specific circumstances. By embracing these innovative strategies, we can build and bridge the financing gap, foster sustainable development, and propel the growth of infrastructure in cities. To attract private sector investment and long term institutional capital into urban infrastructure, we need to put in place policies that place a stronger focus on role of urban planning, revenue generation by cities, and with the ring-fenced mechanisms to protect them, legal and institutional frameworks that create confidence. Such strategies to create an enabling environment for private sector participation will require a coordinated play between public sector, private sector, and the MDBs. Therefore, we must renew our focus on development of an ecosystem of improved creditworthiness of urban local bodies, better institutional capacity, robust financial institutions, and appropriate policy and regulatory framework. We should be conscious of the fact that our investment decisions, as they encompass this critical aspect today, will shape the future of our cities and determine the quality of life for future generations. I'm sure the deliberations since morning have reflected these considerations. I thank the participation and also the participants personally for their valuable time and inputs in the previous session and believe that our efforts towards furthering collaboration between all stakeholders, including MDBs and governments for facilitating urban infrastructure financing, shall be fruitful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your insightful and informative address. With immense pleasure, would now like to welcome Ms. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Honorable Finance Minister of Indonesia, to kindly deliver the keynote address. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Minister Nirmala and other colleagues, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. It is truly an honor for me to be here again on an infrastructure investor dialogue. This is one of the prominent annual forum between G20 and investors. I would like to thank the Indian presidency, especially Minister Nirmala, for inviting me to deliver keynote speech today. We are in a very pivotal moment in history. especially when we are talking about urbanization, in which population growth, environmental challenges are converging. It is critical that we embrace a strategic approach to shaping a better tomorrow for our cities. Cities are not merely concrete cluster or building. They are a vibrant centers of innovations to serve as a catalyst for economic growth, prosperity, a hub of social progress, and guardian of social cohesion and sustainability. Today, I would like to share our experience in advancing sustainable infrastructure development in Indonesia, including at the subnational level, and how this is relevant to the discussion in G20. Distinguished colleague, as we embark on this journey, we recognize the sustainable infrastructure development is not a mere aspiration or an option. It is imperative for our nation's progress. The infrastructure development can help emerging economies like Indonesia escape the middle income trap. It is a strategic pathway that enables us to meet challenges of rapid urbanization, mitigate impact of climate change, and also to foster and strengthen inclusivity and resiliency. On the other side, we are all understand that investing in infrastructure projects require intensive capital and high risk, while public sector still face limited fiscal capacity, especially post-pandemic period. In line with our dialogue today, the private sector has crucial and strategic role in leveraging infrastructure investment, including in the cities. However, we are all understand that the private sector will always have strong interest in major infrastructure projects driven largely by their expectation to generate financial returns. The government then are urged to optimize several policy tools and also using the instrument to attract private sector capital. That is not always easy. Another thing is the affordability of the infrastructure that is being developed. As the largest archipelago country in the world, Indonesia, with more than 17,000 islands, should handle the appropriate policy in ensuring our infrastructure services to our citizens. The role of subnational government, especially city, play a very important role in driving infrastructure development. How we are going to strengthen the local government capacity at the policy level process, resource allocation, and especially on transformation action. At the central level, the government can set a broader policy and create an enabling environment to support subnational government, especially in shaping their cities and region. And I must say, in this case, for Indonesia, this is continued endeavor and effort, not always easy, especially as the big democratic system, both at the national level as well as at the local level. Government of Indonesia has recently reformed our fiscal relation between central and local government, which prioritizing our local budget or local fiscal tools to leverage public infrastructure in order to accelerate the local government ability to develop and create job and reduce poverty, and at the same time addressing the issue of inequality. Within our fiscal tool, we have diverse instrument and scheme. First, we optimize the use of loans for subnational infrastructure financing. The central government has provided facility of soft loan through a state-owned enterprise to finance subnational infrastructure. This facility has leveraged more than 2.2 billion US dollar of public finance through 7,043 programs since 2016. This program has played a significant role in supporting our economic growth, especially during pandemic. The second one is expanding access for subnational government to the capital market. This is through the issuance of local bond and local sukuk. I'm happy to share several of our local government are currently preparing to issue regional and municipal bonds. Through the law, which being discussed and passed, central government is firmly committed to support the effort as well as providing technical assistance to the local government so that they are going to be responsible on managing their fiscal tools. We also encourage local government in scaling up private investment through public-private partnership. 32 signed projects in various sectors with the amount of 19.5 billion, in which 18 projects has already operated, has been launched since 2015. So we are mature enough to actually see what kind of public-private partnership that work and not working. Government of Indonesia also developed several fiscal policy support through our special mission vehicle. Since 2009, we created Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund, or IIGF, and the PTSMI in order for us to be able to operate a more flexible and agile. Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund was established to improve the credit worthiness and quality of public-private partnership. This is including infrastructure projects, especially at the city level. IIGF also provides de-risking instrument for infrastructure guarantee facility for infrastructure investment to create affordable financing services and develop project bankability. Today, with a very high interest rate environment, this financing at the affordable level and also project bankability becoming even more challenging. We also created IIGF Institute to embrace capacity building, especially for the local government and city level in order for them to be able to attract more private capital in a responsible way. With special mission vehicle that we created, we also creating infrastructure financing in 3 synergetic pillars to carry out financing and investment, advisory services, and project development. Since 2018, our special mission vehicle has created SDG Indonesia 1. This is the form of blended finance platform to mobilize SDG financing through our facility, that is development facility, de-risking instrument, financing facility, and equity funding. 34 international development partners, including the World Bank, ADB, Islamic Development Bank, UNDP, AIIB, European Investment Bank, and bilateral agencies like AFD, KfW, JICA, New Zealand Aid Program, USAID, as well as green financing institutions like GGGI, Infrastructure Asia, CPI, and private sector and philanthropists has actually collaborated with us within this SDG Indonesia 1. We have 3.27 billion today, which is 97 blended finance projects under operation. We are introducing this ESG framework for infrastructure financing to strengthen our commitment toward inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future development. I believe these are all the experience that Indonesia has been through in the past decade stay relevant, especially during the current context. In closing, I would like to use this opportunity again that for all of us to be able to continue listening and learning to each other on how a country and especially city can be developed. I believe the collaboration among the public sector, private sector, multilateral development banks, as well as philanthropists, is actually still at the early stage to be developed. MDBs can play a very important role in several instruments, including in enhancing credit and doing the de-risking facility. MDB also can play an important role to develop innovative financing tools and crowd in private sector in addressing infrastructure gap. We are supporting the MDB reform, especially in maximizing their balance sheet in order to be able to answer the challenge of many developing and emerging countries for them to be able to continue develop cities and infrastructure in a sustainable and environmental friendly way. I invite all stakeholders who join us here to support the agenda of building inclusive, resilient, and sustainable cities of tomorrow for the better future for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your valuable address and sharing the information of your country, Indonesia. We now move on to the ministerial panel discussion, which is on Ministry of Finance and Multilateral Development Bank support for financing cities of tomorrow. For the same, would like to invite on stage the moderator of this session, Mr. Matthias Cormann, Honorable Secretary General, OECD. Welcome, sir.
Dear Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, dear Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati, distinguished colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to moderate this high-level ministerial panel today. And picking up on some of the points raised, cities are major engines of economic dynamism, growth, and innovation. They are powerful magnets for skilled workers, and they attract the most productive and innovative firms, thanks to their access to markets, infrastructure, and services. Across OECD countries over the last 2 decades, metropolitan areas accounted for nearly 70% of growth in GDP. That said, barriers to equality of opportunity, that is, barriers to the opportunity to get ahead and to build a better life based on effort and skills, risks holding back the potential of cities and consequently risks holding back the broader economy. By 2050, we project that 5 billion people globally will be living in cities, up from about 3.5 billion back in 2015. So to meet development needs globally, trillions of dollars in additional investment in infrastructure is required annually. And much of this investment will be executed by subnational governments and cities, as they are responsible for 60% of public investment in G20 countries. An important driver to help achieve this objective, as has been observed, is the right policy mix for our cities. Improving access to opportunities through better transport infrastructure, removing regulatory and policy barriers to housing affordability, improving energy affordability and households' resilience to energy shocks. Ministries of finance and multilateral development banks play a key role, not only in facilitating public finance, but also private finance through planning, policy and regulatory frameworks, risk management, and the right fiscal framework. So I'm really looking forward to today's exchange with leading voices on our ministerial panel about the challenges and opportunities to mobilize investment in city infrastructure. And I invite our panelists to join me, Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Lawrence Wong of Singapore, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana of South Africa, President Odile Renaud-Bassot of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and finally, President Masa Asakawa of the Asian Development Bank. So, to start our discussion, let's open with your expectations and the policy actions you have taken to help drive financing of your city infrastructure. And I thought I'd start with you, Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. Singapore is a very successful city state. I guess, you know, how do you see that your infrastructure needs differ compared to other cities? And I mean, what are some of the things that Singapore has done to help finance its infrastructure requirements?
Sure. Happy to share the experience. Thanks for the question. Singapore is indeed unique because we are a city and a country, and we are a very tiny little island. If you put together Gandhinagar and Ahmedabad, you are bigger than Singapore. So that's how small we are. And because we are so small, we try very hard to optimize every little square inch of land we have to make sure we develop and grow in an optimal fashion. And we found that the best way to do this is to have a good master plan, a good, consistent urban master plan, and to follow that master plan as best as you can. It doesn't mean the master plan cannot change, but when you change, you have to have a proper process for updating it and make sure that plan is consistently followed. Good master plans do not fit into political cycles, unfortunately. You can't have a master plan done in 5 years or 4 years. It's impossible. We have a concept plan that we put out ever so often. It sketches out the long-term plans for about 50 years for the country, for the island. That's conceptual, it can change, but it provides a sketch of what we hope to do. And then we put out a statutory land plan for 10 to 15 years. That's enshrined in law. And that means a parcel of land, there's proper zoning, and all investors understand what kinds of plans and zoning and statutory requirements are put in place for these different parcels of land. So to give an example, when we started to build the current Marina Bay in Singapore, that's an extension of our central business district. We had reclaimed land beyond our city center in which we wanted to expand the central business district. So we had land. How did we bring in private capital? Our interest was not just about bringing in private funding. We wanted private sector involvement to make sure we get the best ideas and the best solutions. And so again, with a good, consistent master plan for the entire district, we start thinking about what kind of infrastructure do you put in place. We designed, for example, the cooling infrastructure was completely designed underground, serving not just one building, but the entire district. We had an underground master plan. The piping, the cables, the cooling district, all done, designed, and then you can start tendering out for private sector involvement. The different parcels of land were well zoned, well thought through, and then again, you can start tendering out different parcels of land. Investors will be interested because they know that this is a credible plan. There is stability, there is consistency, and they are interested in coming in. And importantly, it's not done, the tendering of land is not just done in a haphazard, ad hoc manner, but with coherence, with thought, and all adds up in a proper implementation. Right? So when it all comes together, you can start to see the city slowly and gradually unfold before your eyes. And when you start doing these sorts of things in a credible, consistent manner, I think it builds confidence. Investors see results, and then you start a virtuous cycle. Then investors say, look, I am interested in coming in, and the next time you tender out the land, you know that you can get a better price from investors because they are more and more interested. And so that's how we have built Singapore and continue to rebuild Singapore. And it is possible because if you look at Gift City now, Singapore has been present here for quite some time. And you can see consistently how Gift City is developing. The plans are coming into fruition. You have a master developer here. You have parcels being developed. You have infrastructure being developed. And Singapore is happy to play a role here, including through our Stock Exchange Connect, which Prime Minister Modi launched just earlier this month. And I was just very happy to also open DBS's branch office here in Gift City just earlier today. So these are good signs of how consistent, reliable urban planning with steady implementation, consistent implementation, not just 1 year, 2 years, not just within a political term of government, but across many years, can eventually achieve good results and can crowd in more, not just private capital, but private sector ideas and solutions.
Well, thank you very much, Lawrence. Singapore is indeed a great example of what can be achieved. Now, turning to you, Minister Godongwana, in the perspective of South Africa, how is your ministry using your fiscal frameworks to support your cities in mobilizing the financing they need, and how do you work with your cities to achieve your common objectives?
Thank you for that. Maybe let me try by starting at a national level and say what template can we draw from that. You know, one of the important things when we started introducing renewables in South Africa was to do two things. The first one was to provide an efficient and effective procurement system. Secondly, was to design a proper incentive framework, which by now, between 2010 and now, we'll be able to generate private sector participation in the energy generation of about 5,000 megawatts, whatever. So that in itself, the question for us is how do we translate that incentive package and these efficiency gains we've realized into municipalities? Three things we're trying to do for now. The first one is how to utilize the grant system which we provide to these municipalities as part of intergovernmental fiscal relations, the grant system, in order to incentivize private sector participation. And in so doing, provide a long-term and transparency for private sector to know that if you could provide these loans and bring money into and your skills into the municipalities, you've got a long-term funding arrangement which is available. That's the first thing that we have. The second thing what we do is how do we learn from these things and create within their own revenues a framework, a policy, a borrowing framework which will allow this flexibility to crowd in private sector participation. A third element of that has been the learning from the efficiency gains we've done at a national level. How do you make sure that there could be efficiency gains and a delivery system which is efficient and effective for these municipalities? Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of Singapore of having one city, state, one municipality. We are struggling with about 10 of these municipalities, which the biggest one, which have got a sufficient revenue base to be able to do that. So that's the kind of a framework we're trying to formulate. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Moving to here now, the perspective of multilateral development banks. I start with you, President Renaud Bassot. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has a key role to play to help create cities of tomorrow, and sustainable cities have been one of your specific areas of focus. What do you see as some of the major challenges cities, particularly in your areas of activity, face when it comes to mobilizing finance, and how is the EBRD helping them to overcome those challenges?
So thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to concur with everything that has been said about the importance of the cities as a place for investment to improve the quality of life, to address climate challenges and the need for infrastructure. So I really believe, and that's why we launched already in 2016 a sort of dedicated program for green cities, which now we have 60 cities participating, 3 billion of investment up to now, and focusing a lot on green cities and how to bring investment in cities. The challenges we face and cities face in order to, in investment is, several fold. The first one is financial capabilities and in some countries, and it depends of the institutional organization settings, but independent revenues, access to capital market, governance of public local utilities may be a challenge for to access to finance. Second big obstacle, big challenge is to develop a pipeline of bankable projects, because there are a lot of needs, but you need to find projects and to develop projects that can be financed through loans. And the third one is a capacity, administrative capacity to develop at the same time several infrastructure projects and so forth. And it depends very much from one city to the other. That's why our approach, and it's very much in echo of what has been said about the importance of planning. So we are not planning over 50 years, but our program is really focusing on bringing financing, but also a lot of support in capacity building. And one of the key components of our Green City program is to work with the cities. The first thing we do is to work on a Green City Action Plan, which is to look at the needs of the city together with, with a lot of broad consultation of NGOs, citizens, and working really hand in hand with the municipal authorities in order to define what is most important and how to set up a plan between waste management, water management, transportation, district heating, all the kind of needs, but have a sort of consistent approach and not go just project by project. And this is the first pillar. And we're not looking at 50 years, but still having for the next few years a sort of common view of what is needed. And this is a platform also for us to be able to finance, but also bring private investors and so forth. And I very much appreciate what has been said about the clarity of the plan, the clarity of the objectives. These create confidence and facilitate bring private investors. Then we provide financial support, and we do that through direct loan, direct lending, or providing, and I think this is a new key objective, we have to facilitate access to capital market. We just supported Zagreb in issuing a sustainability-linked bond, so playing a role of an anchor investor together with IFC, and tap capital market, and this is something which we need to develop further. And the last element I wanted to underline is our priority to bring private investors. So developing PPPs, and this requires a lot of capabilities, and strengthening of capacities in order to negotiate contract on good terms, balanced terms, and so forth. And we can also support there, but this is an area where there is, local infrastructure are very good area for PPPs, be it in transport, wastewater management, and so forth. And there is a lot of appetite, but all the parameters I was mentioning about bankability, transparency, and administrative capacity are key, and that's what we try to focus on and to provide support.
Very good. Some very interesting innovations there. Now, last but not least, President Masa Asakawa of the Asian Development Bank. Many of the fastest growing regions, many of the fastest growing cities in the world, I should say, are in Asia and indeed in the broader Indo-Pacific. How are they coping with the development pressures, and how does the ADB target its support when it comes to urban infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as rightly mentioned, Asia and Pacific region includes the most populated and dense cities in the world, and yet continue to see urbanization accelerate every day. So region is also characterized by fragile urban areas on small island states in the Pacific, which have which face specific challenges that we should not forget as well. While urbanization has driven economic growth and contributed significantly to poverty reduction, as everybody knows, it has also created major challenges. I'd like to highlight briefly 5. First, rapid and often haphazard urbanization is aggravating already deficient urban infrastructure and services. Most cities still do not have efficient 24/7 water supply systems, nor adequate sanitation and flood management facilities. Second, climate change. Climate change is exacerbating this. Climate change disproportionately affects the poor and vulnerable, especially the residents of informal settlements and low-income communities. Moreover, as cities generates about 75% of global greenhouse gases today, it is very essential for future development of cities to target low carbon growth as part of a net zero strategy. And third, environment stress and degradation. Limited enforcement of pollution control exacerbates environmental degradation. The deterioration of air and water quality and plastic pollution is a critical transboundary issue and impacts the health and sustainability of cities. And fourth, social dimensions. The cities of the Asia region are undergoing an unprecedented demographic change. But the outlook is not homogeneous. The population is rapidly aging. At the same time, several countries have huge young populations without an adequate number of good quality, well-paying jobs. And finally, fifth, governance and institutional capacity. The cities of the regions often have weak institutional capacity and overlapping legal and regulatory frameworks. Invariably, poor governance results in poor strategic planning decisions, limited public services, and undermines financial sustainability. In this context, ADB is strengthening its support to cities in a holistic manner, through policy dialogues, provision of sovereign loans, grants, and technical assistance, mobilizing co-financing, private sector financing, and transaction advisory services, TAS, for public-private partnership. Let me quickly provide 2 examples. ADB's policy-based lending to India under the Sustainable Urban Development and Service Delivery Program is supporting policy improvement for better water service delivery, enhancing water security and property tax collection. In the Philippines, ADB recently, actually last month, approved the Davao Public Transport Modernization Project, which is expected to reduce air pollutant and greenhouse gas emissions by establishing a modern public bus transport system in Davao City. ADB recognizes the complexity of the challenges faced by cities across Asia and the Pacific. We also recognize the need for often integrated solutions to improve urban infrastructure while supporting the enabling environment, capacity development, and financial sustainability. Finally, central to the success of these efforts are, I think, partnerships with both the public and private sector. We aim to be a bridge in that regard. That is why I'm particularly pleased to join the session today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masa. And I now propose to go into a second round of questions focusing on the issue of increasing the focus on sustainable infrastructure. Lawrence, Singapore is a hub for regional finance. What initiatives is Singapore undertaking to support investors, deepen markets, and to develop the right instruments to meet the various financing needs of cities across Asia?
Sure. We know that the financing needs are tremendous. Huge needs for infrastructure, for transition projects, for green projects as well. So Singapore is a financial center for the region and the world. We believe we can play a role to catalyze more of such financing. How can we do so? We can do so in three areas. First, to enhance Singapore's value proposition, not just as a financing center, but also as an infrastructure center. Because in Singapore, we are host to a range of professional services, including architectural and engineering services, project advisory, legal services, multilateral development banks. The World Bank has its infrastructure office here in Singapore. We have close links with the ADB, the AIIB, and all these whole ecosystem of high-quality professional services can help companies, can help countries to think about project structuring, think about de-risking, and with the aim of making the projects more bankable. Because that's ultimately how you get financing. You have to make the project bankable. So that's number one. How can we provide high-quality services to design, structure, de-risk, and make more projects bankable? Second, how can we go beyond bank-based financing and draw in more sources of capital, including from the capital markets and from institutional investors, something that was mentioned just now. And there, again, we are looking at different ways in which we can do so. For example, in Singapore, we have a framework for business trusts so that asset owners can recycle capital from existing projects into new projects via the capital markets, because far too many companies have too much of their capital stuck in buildings, in property, in projects, and are not sweating and working their capital sufficiently. And if they can unlock that into a business trust, recycle the capital into a new project, then you can get a lot more funding for infrastructure, for sustainability projects. We are also working on other mechanisms that can allow a transfer of debt from banks into institutional investors via securitization. So we have set up a facility which will buy out bank lending into brownfield projects, securitize that, and put that out to institutional investors, thereby freeing up bank capital for lending into new projects. So again, through different innovative mechanisms, we will be able to attract more sources of funding from capital markets, from institutional investors, and our aim really is to make infrastructure an asset class in its own right that will be attractive to more investors. And we are doing our best on this front as a financial center. And third is the area of blended finance, because after doing all of the above, there are still projects that will not be bankable. So what do you do if they are not bankable? If they are marginally bankable, then I think through some form of blended finance, we will be able to tilt the balance and get these projects funded. So again, we are looking at platforms for which we can scale up blended finance solutions. It's easy to talk about blended finance in theory, but at the end of the day, you need more people to provide the concessionary capital. Everyone likes to provide commercial capital, but who is going to provide concessionary capital, first loss capital, so that we can form some blended finance? So there, I think we would like to work with governments, multilateral development banks, to form the first layer, and then we can structure blended finance solutions that can be scaled up, particularly for Southeast Asia and the region at large. We are also working with more philanthropic foundations and donors, because there are family offices in Singapore, and we see many of them with a keen interest, not just to bring their monies and invest out of Singapore, but to set up philanthropic foundations and to do good as well. So by building an ecosystem of governments, multilateral development banks, philanthropic foundations, we hope we can have more concessionary first loss capital, which can then catalyze more private funding and allow more blended finance structures to take off. So these are the three areas which we are working on.
Well, thank you very much, Lawrence. Certainly some food for thought, in particular when it comes to how can we make blended finance actually work better and deliver the outcomes we want to see delivered. Now, Enoch, many of the largest cities in South Africa have been issuing municipal bonds to support infrastructure investment. They're also starting to issue green bonds at a national level. I guess, how are you sort of supporting or facilitating those bonds issuances while also maintaining a level of fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility?
We have got a difficult challenge with most people. I mean, we've got a tight constitutional arrangement, which has got implication on your intergovernmental fiscal relations. Our municipalities, by design, get an equitable share from the national raised revenue. They also got their own revenue raising powers. What that means, they, to some extent, have got autonomy in making these decisions. It doesn't mean we can't influence them. I'm just talking about the design of the interfiscal relations in South Africa and how impact on us, our capacity to be able to do that. But what was also done is I've made reference to an updated borrowing policy framework by which we're trying to nudge to create an environment how municipalities borrow and nudge them into borrowing, in going into green bonds. And correctly, they have said a number of them now are beginning to go into green bonds. Parallel to that is the capacity development, where we're beginning to integrate them to work with our DFIs to achieve two things. The first, the capacity to raise the money, and secondly, the skills for that purpose. So we're able to do that, of course, in a fiscal prudent manner. That's where some of these things have got a challenge. But in summary, we're saying we're beginning to nudge our municipalities, as we've started at the national level, to go into green bonds, to nudge them into the same direction. As you can see, as we have made, you've made reference to that point, that a number of them, particularly the Big 10, are beginning to go into that direction. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Enoch. Now, Odile, having listened to Enoch and Lawrence, and from the perspective of a leader of a multilateral development bank, I mean, what do you think is needed so that we can all do a better job when it comes to sustainable finance of urban infrastructure?
I would say the first thing for me is, and we see that a lot because we are a bank which the BRD can finance sub-sovereign without sovereign guarantee, and we are keen to do that. But we sometimes, as I was mentioning before, see the limits and the financial structure of the municipalities or their fiscal autonomy not strong enough in order to be able to do that. And if we want municipal sub-sovereign being able to issue on capital market, you need to have the institutional framework with the government, ensuring that they have capacity to repay, they have sufficient autonomy, and so as to be able to stand alone. And we are doing a lot of that, and I think this is one important element. The second element is to note that there is a huge appetite for green bonds. Everybody's looking for green bonds. I mean, all MDBs now are moving towards being fully Paris aligned. They need to invest in green, and it's true also with the private sector, but sometimes it's still too risky. And it was, as it was mentioned, the interest risk is still too high for private sector investors to come in. And then comes this issue of blended finance, on which we are all working. I think it's a very important solution, but it's not easy because it's costly. And for example, we've worked on, and it was very, very much echoing what was said on refinancing of a project, for example, in solar. By a Norwegian company wanted to sell the asset and to have refinancing in order to be able to invest elsewhere, which is very good. In Egypt, in order to increase by 7 notch the rating, we had to join up forces with MIGA providing credit risk, we providing liquidity risk. So overall, the guarantee represented more than 1/3 of the project itself. So it can be done, but it's still very expensive and difficult to scale. So I think the key challenge we have is how to scale up this kind of experiment, innovation in a way that can address the magnitude of the needs that we have. So, but I think that's a combination of action to strengthen the fiscal situation of the municipalities, to finance ourselves, co-finance and develop new innovative instruments.
Well, thank you very much, Odell. Massa, looking at the specific challenges for cities in developing countries, how do you think they can best be addressed, and how can multilateral development banks be most effective in supporting efforts for cities in developing countries?
Yeah, thank you. Well, with this growing demand for sustainable urban infrastructure and services, everybody would agree that mobilization of finance, including private capital, is so essential. Private sector investment in cities is often challenged by a couple of things. One, absence of creditworthy city governments. Two, due to low revenue collection such as property tax. And three, inefficient expenditure management. And four, opaque credit structures. And finally, poor cost recovery mechanisms. Enhancing on-source revenue stream is the principal requirement, in my mind, to enhance creditworthiness of cities. Cities' on-source revenue have remained very low, often due to the slow pace of municipal governance reforms and lack of ability to charge by the city governments. Moreover, cities often have high dependence on transfers from national and provincial governments. ADB believes cities have much scope, to increase on-source revenues. For example, average property tax collection in major developing member countries of ADB is just 0.2 to 0.3% of GDP, compared to OECD countries at 1.1% of GDP. Governance reforms in setting up affordable user charges for sustainable municipal operation is the second area of attention. Charges for essential services like water and sanitation remain low due to political and social considerations, and are often not sufficient to meet operation and maintenance costs. Integrated urban planning needs to be strengthened accordingly in our member countries to realize the benefit of urban agglomeration for low carbon and inclusive economic development. Such a planning process will also support developing a pipeline of bankable infrastructure projects, which is an essential element to mobilize private capital. We recognize that MDB plays a key role in supporting cities in promoting regulatory and institutional environment reforms, bankable project preparation, investment financing, and capacity building. ADB has highlighted the importance of developing capacity of cities as a lead knowledge partner to the G20 Infrastructure Working Group under Indian presidency. Alongside, ADB's Creating Investable Cities program helps build the technical, financial, and managerial capacity of leading cities across Asia Pacific to access private sector finance. The program will support the cities to enhance on-source revenues and creditworthiness by addressing the issue I have mentioned. For example, reforming property tax rates and billing and collection. Moreover, we aim to support the development of revenue-generating bankable project pipeline, supporting topics such as urban mobility, social housing, and creation of circular economy.
Well, thank you very much. Now, time is advancing, so I'm just going to have one rapid final round, 30 seconds each. If you had a magic wand, if you had a button that you could press, where you could fix the one issue that is holding us back when it comes to boosting sustainable investment in urban infrastructure, what would it be? We'll start with Lawrence. 30 seconds.
I'm not sure if I can finish in 30 seconds. We really want to accelerate financing for transition and green projects. I mean, we've been talking about this. We have some ideas. We are looking at how best to scale up a blended finance platform. And we're talking, let's make this real. For example, there are providers of concessionary capital out there. Everyone wants to have your own little project. $10 million here, $20 million here. But really, we are not making an impact if we fund individual projects. But if we pool, if we are prepared and have an alignment of interest, pool together the concessionary capital, 500 million, scale up through blended finance and make it 5 billion of blended finance funding for Southeast Asia, for example. Why not? Wouldn't that be more impactful? Can this happen? My wish is that it can. And if you are interested, please come to talk to Singapore.
There you go. That's a very concrete proposal. I think there's some discussion to be had. Enoch, your idea.
Quick issue is that in South Africa, we've got a huge infrastructure deficiency. That's also a positive. In investing in that infrastructure is quite a critical component. But what is going to be important is the same thing of those putting of those resources. But in additional aspect for, like all developing economies, your major problem we're confronting is capacity. If I mean, the multinational development banks and others could help us with that capacity, that would be a major breakthrough for us.
Thank you. Enoch, Odell?
For me, from a different point of view, if I look at what we can do more at the local level is really have a holistic approach. If I think about, for example, mobility in the cities, you need to bring together the electricity, the energy producer, the fleet car, I mean, or the bus car producers, the transportation network, so that, I mean, having everybody around the table and thinking about the consistent strategy is what is needed. And with that, I think cities can become a laboratory for innovation, and because it's at a scale where you can really change things probably easier than at a global government level.
Thank you very much, Odell. Massa?
Yep. If I am to pick up only one thing, I would like to stress that municipal resource mobilization is particularly important to leverage greater levels of financing towards sustainable infrastructure in cities. This includes property tax reforms, as I mentioned, as a main source of revenues for local governments. And second is urban planning reforms, including land use and building regulations to facilitate land value capture. And finally, third, reforms in user charges for delivery of the sustainable services. These topics are where we are currently focusing our efforts. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, ministers, colleagues, friends. Please join me in thanking the panel. So thank you so much to each of you on the panel for sharing your thoughts. This is obviously a very important topic, and it's also a key area of work for the OECD. We were pleased to support the Indian presidency through the G20 OECD report on financing cities of tomorrow, which will be presented to ministers tomorrow. It highlights three priorities: adopting comprehensive long-term urban plans to provide certainty for investors in transport, infrastructure, and housing projects. And a number of the speakers on the panel have just touched on the importance of that. It focuses on leveraging private investment for urban projects through innovative approaches, including land value capture. And it also focuses on scaling up the issuance of sustainable bonds at the city level in a fiscally responsible way. Building on this, some of the key points we've covered today, cities will need to improve their urban planning and to design the right tools to mobilize financial resources to invest in urban infrastructure. They cannot, of course, do this alone. Ministries of finance and multilateral development banks must stand by their sides, working to build capacity, develop new financial instruments, and build partnerships with private investors. Multilateral development banks can support urban development by mobilizing sustainable finance for climate resilience, providing technical expertise, promoting better urban planning, catalyzing the use of private investment, and developing standards for sustainable infrastructure. New vehicles for sustainable finance, such as green bonds, could also help cities to attract investors guided by environmental, social and corporate governance principles. And with that, I will now pass the floor to our friend and colleague, President Ajay Banga from the World Bank, who will deliver the closing remarks for today's investor dialogue.
He's much taller than I am. You can see that. A tall guy. Ow. I think I'm destroying the microphones. All right. So let me get this right. There we go. Much better. So a lot's got talked about, and I want to first of all thank India's G20 presidency for hosting this dialogue. It's my first opportunity to be a part of this kind of event, and what I don't want to do is repeat a lot that already got said about the importance of cities, how many people are going to be living there, how it's going to be really critical, how they've got to be inclusive, they've got to be resilient. You've heard all that. Most of you in the audience are professionals in this space. You don't need someone like me to tell you that. What I am concerned about in my first, I've been 6 weeks in this job, and I think what I am concerned about is that the definition of trying to eradicate poverty is inadequate without including challenges with climate change, pandemics, fragility, food insecurity. These things are intertwined crises. So when we talk about developing cities that are inclusive and useful for people to live in, we have to remember that it's become much more complicated because of the nature of the intertwined crises that our world is currently living through. And building sort of, thinking through that, what I'm trying to say is that the World Bank should amend its vision to go from just being poverty focused to saying, yes, we want to create a world that is free of poverty, but we have to be on a livable planet. And that's kind of critical. And in sort of building resilient and inclusive cities is completely core to that vision. Cities that are inclusive, but cities that are safe for women and girls, and where young people can have jobs so they can have the dignity of a future. Cities that are resilient to climate change. So I cannot tell you how interesting it was to me to read the topic here and say India's included the idea of cities being really important here. I think highlighting the importance of planning, which DPM Wong spoke about, because that gives you predictability, but connecting and then financing are all part of this. And the ministerial panel spoke a lot to the financing. I think it's essential to find sources for large capital outlays that are needed to provide new infrastructure and services for these cities and replace and upgrade aging infrastructure in a number of the cities. So this calls for concerted efforts by governments and international financial institutions. We need to bolster these lagging private sector flows. To be honest, we've all been talking about private capital flows that should somehow flow miraculously into all these places. We haven't done a very good job. And so we have to get past that conversation to getting to understand what holds back, what are the barriers holding back private investment in sustainable quality infrastructure. Some of them, I think, are unfavorable policy environments and regulatory constraints. But the other part of this is the absence of project de-risking and the innovative finance necessary. We have had a lot of conversation on that just now with Matthias. I think a topic that got addressed by Odell, but I care about it deeply at the city level, is municipal financing. If you look at India's opportunity with the kind of cities we have here is actually municipal financing for the future. A lot of India's cities are very creditworthy. They may not have their data presented in a form that enables private investors to comprehend the creditworthiness of that city. They may not have the ability to produce the bankable projects because their own ability in terms of the number of people who could take on dealing with so many investors is limited. Yes, they don't have that. Maybe they don't have the credit analysis. Maybe they need first loss guarantees. Maybe they need a liquidity system. Maybe they just need the technical support. But the reality is municipal financing is the answer for the way for India to progress in its cities. And I know that the Madam Finance Minister understands this better than almost anyone in what she's trying to build and deal with. To respond to this exact issue of private investment, I last month in the Paris summit, the new Global Financing Pact, I announced the launch of a private sector investment lab. I'm trying to take a concrete step to develop and rapidly scale these solutions. The fact is that the idea is to crowd in more levels, but the idea is to improve financing structures, ways to better align the World Bank with the needs and the speed of private finance, and then find a way to balance and allocate risks across investors. So last week, we announced a concrete list of 15 chief executive officers and chairs who will make up this lab. These are people from long-term asset managers, so they have 30-year visions for their investment, but they also have the ability to have their operators and others who will bring their knowledge to the table. So the fact is, what I want to do with this lab is focus on scaling transition finance in renewable energy. Again, a number of you talked about sustainable financing and green bonds. That's where I want to start. But I think that a whole World Bank evolution roadmap emphasizes the importance of promoting a change in private finance for this very purpose, from upstream to downstream, and using all the instruments from the World Bank, IFC and MIGA with a one World Bank approach. Odile talked about MIGA and the partnerships, so I'm going to end with that in a moment. My belief is that the scale of the challenges are too big for any one government or any one multilateral bank to do so on its own, and getting the right level of partnerships across multilateral banks is going to be important for scale. MIGA is one example of that. But I think what's even more important is getting the replicability and scalability. So once we know something works, it strikes me as very obvious that we should be scaling and replicating what works as many times as possible. Yet I struggle with why we keep trying to redefine and redesign the wheel for each new project. It's almost as though the intellectual exercise of designing a financing methodology for the next project is more important than actually getting to the scale of building many more projects. And that's where I think DPM Wong's original point comes back again. The idea of careful planning, which is predictable, but then working in a scalable, replicable manner. I have seen Singapore develop Marina Bay, but I've also seen them develop prior locations. And if you look at the pattern over 25 years, they scale, they replicate, they scale, they replicate, and they try not to learn new things each time. All they do is what mistakes they made, they will learn from. But they don't try and replicate the successful part, just keep going at full speed. I would like us to go away with that as the most important idea. Not only are we trying to find creative ways to get private sector capital, we need to find sensible ways to replicate and scale, because there is nothing the private sector likes more than replicating and scaling what works. And I think that's what we really need to think our way through. So once again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this. I hope that by the next time we meet, this private sector investment lab would have 4 or 5 very concrete things that I can bring to you as ideas for replicating and scaling the idea of investing in infrastructure. Thank you again very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your warm thank you note and also for the closing remarks. We now, with pleasure, take a break for 10 minutes and then assemble over here for the text symposium. Please be over here on time so that we can learn a lot of things during that symposium. And thank you, Honorable Finance Minister, Madam, and all the esteemed delegates over here who had joined for the ministerial panel discussion. Thank you.